Hey, it's Stu, and this is a week in reading review for the second week of November. Quite a big week, and I'm surprised actually because I thought that I was kind of moving more slowly. But anyway, there's also another book that I don't have the physical copy for that I just got on Libby Audio that I'm going to talk about in this pile, and I'll just kind of go in reverse order from like the most recent. Well, let me just say I'll go in order of most recently finished, the one that I finished first about a week ago, and talk about them just a little bit. I think I also want to include in this video where I got the book and where I'm going to give the book, as I often do, because the story of the actual physical copy, I think, is, for me, as interesting. Well, not as, but it's interesting as well as the content inside of the book. So Pat Barker's Regeneration was a Booker kind of impulse. I decided, you know what, if I'm going to read this book, it should be now when I'm reading Booker's. When I hauled this book, which was from the neighborhood little free library, I remember saying, you know, I don't know. It's a war book, I can admittedly say I don't really like war books. War movies, where the content is about the soldiers. I understand that there's a lot to reflect on there, and I've definitely especially watched and read my share of them. And to be fair, I haven't read in a very, very long time, but I do remember liking All's Quiet on the Western Front. And Catch-22, which I started multiple times, I don't think it ever finished, which is ironic because it kind of reminds me of Catch-22. I have this sequel, so this is a trilogy, and I did end up picking up the sequel. This I got from Little Free Library, and the sequels are actually right there. And that's the Eye in the Door. And I got that at I think it was a thrift store for between $3 and $5. I am a little over halfway through this book. I'm finding it, for reasons that aren't surprising to me, hard to really get into this book, although I think Pat Barker's writing is more than fine. I really appreciate the introduction of female characters along these storylines, and the focus on, what's happening is one of the protagonist, he's written a letter and said, you know, I'm not going back to war. He was a celebrated war hero and poet, and to understand a real historical figure. So I think there's several real historical figures in here whose sort of parts of their life are fictionalized, and then other fictionalized characters. So in 1917, Sigmund, I think it's Sassoon is how you pronounce it, he says basically he's not going back to war because there's no point in it. And then so he's sent to a mental asylum in Edinburgh. And because if you think war is so crazy, then you have to be treated for being crazy so that you will go back to war. And I think that is really the most that I'm going to get from this book. I think there are some parts of this book that are quite traumatic, and I keep just like, I do that thing when there's also essay in a book, like I understand that my eyes are reading it, but my brain shuts off to it. So I think that I, in a few cases, fell out of the story because of that. And then in a few cases, I'm finding it really hard to stay in the story. I actually started this book a long time ago and decided, you know what, because of, it's not even slow moving. The chapters are quite small, and the story kind of moves along. There's enough characters. And although there's some, for instance, colloquialisms, like how, say, these Scottish women are talking, that it is a little bit mucky for me. It's accessible language. So I don't quite understand where I'm bogged down, but I am. So I think that this book is well worth reading for sure. And I'm going to continue to try to finish it. I might start another book as well and just kind of go back to it in phases, as I have been. But I don't know if I'll do a review video. I will unhaul this book in a little free library, and I think I will actually unhaul the Eye in the Door with it. I think that if somebody finds and who knows this trilogy, they'd like to find those two together. And especially given just how I'm mucking through this one, I don't know. I mean, given all of these things to read, if I want to continue with the trilogy, at least now in my life. I mean, it's notable that that's something that I can revisit later. Okay, so the next is Two Nights in Lisbon by Chris Pavone or Pavone. I got this book from the Friends of the Library. It was one of my 2 free books, and it's got a fantastic flop. So this book gets 1 snap and 2 giant eye rolls, and by that, snap for being propulsive. Like this is a 430-page book that I read basically in one sitting, as these kind of like propulsive thrillers are, and also a testament to the sort of complexity and depth of this book. Eye roll number 1, this book is sort of marinated in male view and then glazed with sort of like the pillars of toxic masculinity that then Chris Pavone mansplains as problematic as part of rape culture and the Me Too movement throughout the book. And that to me was actually fascinating, but in that kind of way where my eyes actually rolled a few times. Like I literally rolled my eyes at this book a few times. The second eye roll is for like the sort of what I like to refer to as Independence Day, the movie, style American centrism of this book. It positions white middle-class Americans as Americans, like as the monolith of Americans, and then puts them in a foreign setting without really any homage to the foreign setting. And I think what really got me was this one line when she needs to get a notary for a several million euro transaction. And she says, "Where am I going to get an English translator in Lisbon on the 4th of July?" Well, first of all, for those kinds of funds, Lisbon professionals, like professionals all over the world, often do transactions in English, not just with Americans, but with speakers of multiple languages, as those transactions are often done in English. Second of all, she used Google Translate earlier in the book and then went on, and then there's this weird sort of diatribe of like, Americans like to pay for everything, which also was kind of just weird and off. Like, if that's what you're going to criticize Americans for. And then thirdly, no, it's the 4th of July is a holiday which happens inside of a country, and all countries in the world have holidays which don't happen in other countries. And other countries, in which case, don't celebrate those holidays, and it doesn't impact them in any way at all. So was there some kind of a suggestion that Portugal in any way observes any part of the 4th? Or was there some kind of suggestion in this book that they couldn't get an English translator because that would be people who would be honoring an American holiday, when in fact, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, England, amongst a few where the official language, or one of the official languages, is actually English, is very close to Portugal, and they also don't celebrate the 4th. And not to mention just the enormous amount of English speakers in this time, 2022. That's the setting of this book, not 1995. So I thought that was ridiculous, and I know that was a lot for me to say about how ridiculous that statement is, but in case you wanted to know, like, it was exemplar of the kind of American centrism that I find, that I roll my eyes. Actually, I laughed out loud. It was almost like satirical, when in fact it wasn't. It was actually just part of the what's meant to be believable plot. There were lots of holes in plot in this. I think, again, for someone who wants a propulsive novel, who doesn't want to overthink, who's like, there's plenty of movies, there's plenty of examples of this kind of entertainment that people like just fine. And I'm not mad at them. It just, for me, it was eye rolly. And I had also I understood the tone and tenor of this book going in. I thought it did a good job for what it was. And I'm not even mad. I just, with all of these books to read, I think that I can afford to be, for my own taste and desires and what I roll my eyes at, more discerning than a book like this in the future. And I will, note to self, promise to listen to myself. And I was like, I don't think I really, like, this would have been like the book you read at a train station or something. And I was right about that, but, or that you pick up and just read because it's there, but not one to read when you have lots of other really great choices. You don't have to be paper thin or overly stereotypical to be propulsive. And so what I want to continue to talk about while just getting done talking about this book, is that I read My Sister the Serial Killer by Oniken Braithwaite, and I found this book incredibly propulsive. Like, you get into this book and it's like momentum propels you all the way through it, because of her short chapters, because of her curt writing style. And, there's plenty of twists that aren't like so, for me, like, there's twists, but the twists aren't so blatant and in your face. And again, for what the kind of thing that makes me roll my eyes in My Sister the Serial Killer. So it was a testament of, like, you can be propulsive and still thought-provoking and unique and exploratory, both in your, like, utilizing storytelling techniques, but also like what you're confronting with your literature. And I found this book very confronting in that propulsive way of, for example, this book sort of like mansplains Me Too culture, I'll just call it that for lack of a better word, but then sort of suggests that because through male gaze, describes a female character who's attractive, and therefore that's the story of an attractive woman, without really fully coming to any kind of way, I'll say way, to say that actually this is the problem of misogynistic patriarchy that objectifies women, and how attractive you are actually doesn't really denote how much harassment and or assault you've had to put up with in your life. This book confronts the objectification of what misogynistic patriarchies have deemed as beautiful, and then its quest to destroy that beauty. And I think that it does it in a fantastic way that's not splainy, that if you know, you know, and you kind of understand then the current of sociopathic rage that's happening, if I might go so far. I can see, lovers of this book would love this book. This for me was such a great read, and it was unexpected. Like, it came up, I had picked it kind of as October vibe, spooky season, and I didn't know what to expect too much. I heard a couple of reviews of people saying, like, if you like, sort of quirky books with female-centered characters that also center on female topics that don't need to be explained to people who know what they are, then this is your book. I would agree. I also got this from my neighborhood Little Free Library, so it's going back into a Little Free Library, even though I have several people that I would like to suggest this book to in my own friend and acquaintance circle. Saints of the Household by Ari Tyson was a listen. Well, it was a hybrid, because this book is verse and prose, and I thought Ari Tyson did a fantastic job of doing that. In here we get to know two twin brothers, Jay and Max, and their story of dealing with domestic violence, defining their identities, defining their masculinity, defining their coming of age. It's a very coming of age book. And I, when done well, I love coming of age. This book got plenty of accolades. I would recommend this book to any and all lovers of, especially coming of age, and of literature. This Ari, I'm going to say Thiessen, I think it's Thiessen, is Bree, as are these characters. So there's some explanation of Indigenous identities, and certainly just identity through race, ethnicity in this. And I really appreciated the way that it's done as multiple ways. Multiple ways in which people identify and how they build their identity and how they come of age within them. And I also really appreciated that there's two twin brothers, and they're the twins are handling their coming of age a bit differently, and what it means to come of age. They're twins, so everything else is the same. But they, of course, are two individual humans, so nothing is a monolith, right? Like, people experience the world differently, and they make sense of it differently. And then there are things that that are collectively understood. I thought this was such a fantastic book to read and listen to right after they're there. I thought that they were great ones to do in proximity, and I would recommend folks do that to anyone who wants sort of like read this and that at the same time. Of course, it's Native American History Month and Heritage Month, so that's how this ended up sort of in a TBR during the same month. This book I was super excited to find at a thrift store in Corvallis, Oregon, and I may actually put it with there either in a little free library or go ahead and curate that pair read for a friend of mine who probably has a lot of reading to do that they're not going to get to at the kind of pace that I read. So, and for future reads, we'll see. I don't know. I kind of almost feel like, okay, then you can find it later when you're ready, and I'll put these out into little free libraries. And I'd put this with there. Okay, for Neurovember, so my book focusing on neurovergence, or character with who's neurodivergent. I picked Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. This also was in Fall Vibes. This also was in 10 Until the End. This also is one that's been on my shelf for a very long time, and I'm almost positive was longlisted for the Women's Prize. I had just read The Maid, and so I was coming into this actually a little bit trepidatious in that I didn't feel comfortable reading The Maid by Nita Prose. I didn't. I felt like it was voyeuristic. I wasn't sure. I don't want to make any kind of diagnosis, nor a character, nor of author. And I didn't know if it was how are we defining quirky? And this Eleanor Oliphant is, sort of understood to be quirky. However, where I really can say that this book fit Neurovember is there is a diagnosis in this book. Eleanor Oliphant is diagnosed with clinical depression, and we know collectively that this character is quirky. We know she doesn't get social cues, so there's some also implicit things about her communication style is really direct and sometimes is off-putting. It feels rude. I think that, that's a way a character can be, which may or may not have a diagnosis. And I also like that books can, build characters any way what they want. I appreciated the tenderness with which they built the character of Eleanor Oliphant. I felt Gail Honeyman made me feel incredibly endeared to Eleanor, and I was incredibly endeared to Eleanor. Check trigger warnings. This book is heartwarming and also incredibly traumatic. I found it quite heavy. I cried a few times, and where it's sort of almost feels and build is heartwarming. It's not, but there's definitely, it covers clinical depression, suicidal ideation, which someone might want to know before going into the book. I'm super glad I read it. I got to it way late on the hype. It would be one of those like, you know, over a hyped book that you want to read, or FOMO. And I found this in a Little Free Library. I've seen it everywhere. It's one of those books that you see everywhere, and I'm excited to put it back into a Little Free Library. I'm glad that I read it. Also found in a Little Free Library, also super hyped book, was R.F. Kuang's Babel. This was a bit of a chunker, and I thought that I was going to kind of read it, and I did. In chunks, I did intersplice a few other things with it. I, as someone who loves languages, sort of amateur linguistic person, definitely a language learner, speaker, reader, listener, I really appreciated kind of the geeking out part of language in this book, about languages and translators and translation, and how this little bit of magic system was based on that. I really appreciated that. I found it really interesting that it was confronting colonization more than anything. This book is a meditation on colonization. It's also a meditation on who fits in or who belongs or who benefits from systems of power and control, power, privilege, and control, which are all topics within colonization. And it was really focused on the British Empire and its acquisition of silver to build its wealth, as did this book, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, which I also read this month. So I thought that was an interesting, like, wow, we're going to talk about silver and the British Empire. So I can see why this book was hyped. It was also a compelling and fun read. There were a couple little times when I almost rolled my eyes, but most of the time I felt very satiated by this book and folks who love fantasy, or academia, and I guess this is like dark academia. This certainly, I can see the hype of this book. I am glad that I got to it finally. I think this was better to have gotten to in this season than the summer, so I'm kind of glad I booted it off summer. And this, again, 3 books from this stack were from my neighborhood Little Free Library. So my neighborhood Little Free Library delivers. I have another Little Free Library that often has fantasy that moves, that I get some fantasy from. So that's where this is gonna go into. One that's kind of close, like I can walk to it, but it's not like literally just outside my door. While all of this was going on and I was reading those books, I was also listening to Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. It was one of those, okay, I'm just gonna put it on hold and I'm gonna do it because I haven't experienced James Baldwin's fiction, and it just felt like the time. And James Baldwin is he's just such a genius and such a good writer, and he is tender and vulnerable in ways that I find similar, since I have been reading and rereading in several languages, Ocean Vuong. And I think that there's a little bit of tenderness in the way that James Baldwin confronts trauma in the world and understands the world and builds characters that were a little like Giovanni's Room wasn't, piecing together of memories and, writing, letters to his mother as Ocean Vuong's On This Life We Are Briefly Gorgeous, but it certainly was an understanding of how one becomes the way that they are. So there's definitely a coming of age in Giovanni's Room. And the one thing that I will say about Giovanni's Room is it does explore Americanism versus Europeanism, and sort of these tensions between how Americans are perceived in Europe, very particularly in France in that book. And it does just so much a better job of addressing stereotypes instead of embracing them, and then sort of working through them through characters. Giovanni's Room is sad. It's very sad as well. Like you become extremely endeared to the characters, although I didn't like the characters. They're not likable characters in Giovanni's Room, but you are endeared to them and you are rooting for them. Like, it certainly doesn't embrace the sort of happily ever after trope. It's such a good listen. It's definitely one that I want to actually read the book with my physical eyes sometime in the future, and of course experience more James Baldwin. So then the last book I'm going to talk about in this video is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is all the Gothic. This is very much uses Gothic tropes. I find I'm not really a Gothic reader. It's not my genre, and where I am, I read widely, and I do find things to enjoy widely. I wouldn't turn to Gothic regularly, although in my early teens, Edgar Allan Poe was my go-to. So there is some nostalgia. I mean, the same way that also in my sort of a little bit, my mid-teens, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was a bit of a go-to, and that sort of is my foray always into sci-fi, since I wouldn't also call myself a sci-fi reader. And the same way that, the Lord of the Rings was, a segue into fantasy, is where I go back to my roots in fantasy. So with roots with Edgar Allan Poe and a deep love for it, there's a lot of Gothic. There's a lot of use of visuals to be creepy, to be really, really creepy. This book is incredibly atmospheric, and quite honestly, that's enough. Like, if that's what you're doing, that's enough. Silvia Moreno Garcia does more in a way that is still quite commercially viable. Like, I found this a very commercially viable book, with a little bit of substance, and it absolutely still is confronting body autonomy, sexism, and the impacts of colonization. Like, those are top. Like, this book meditates on those issues, like R.F. Kuang's Babel and Arcane History. You don't have to know a lot about language or appreciate a lot about a single topic, such as language, maybe to enjoy this book. And it does take place in Mexico, and Mexico is important if you want to know a little bit about, sort of the impact of the British Empire's silver acquisition, for example, right? And maybe not think too stereotypically about what is Mexican history as well. It offers some tidbits for you that you can walk away with, but you also don't need, it's not a historical fiction. You're not going to, and nor is it really, really like the house, the haunted, the Gothic things that go bump in the night in a house could be anywhere. So those other little sprinkles of the plot I found delightful, not distracting, especially for what this book is, which is for an homage for she's a great Gothic writer. And I have I'm trying to see if I can find her other books on here so I can tell you the other book that I have, because this was a display book for a long time. I actually got this book at an independent bookstore. It was on, bargain books or whatever. So I didn't pay an extortionate, didn't pay the full price for this book. And then I was like, should I try to take that back because I paid more? And I actually think that I'm going to put this in a little free library. I think that the little free library system needs book variety and popular books, and I think that this is a popular book. I can't think of the other book that I have, but it's also a beautiful book. So it replaced this as the display book. And yeah, I think given the right, wanting just a commercial Gothic sort of situation that, meditates on deeper topics, but isn't fully confronting, and that's what I'm going to expect of the next book, but I've only read one, so authors can not do the same thing in book after book. So I have another one by her that I want to get to reading maybe in this next year. And I also have I have Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, and I expect it to be a quite different book, but it would be my second book by this author. I don't plan to ever read another one by him. If Gail Honeyman has any other books, I'd be interested, but I think this is her debut. Stuff to know that I'll look up. If I found anything else by R.E. Thiessen, I would absolutely pick it up. Mostly, yeah, some books for children. Yeah. And I am to understand that Ointon Braithwaite just came out with another book, or is just coming out with another book, so it won't hit my orbit if it's that recent until it hits, little free libraries or book sale, used book sales, thrift stores, that kind of thing. And then I already said Pat Barker seems fine. Actually, really don't know why I'm so bogged down in this book, but I have one other which I believe that I'm going to unhaul with this one. So that's kind of how I feel about those books and authors, and what's going to happen with them now that I'm done. It's Monday, so I plan to do whatever I'm going to do with this book by today. And I'm listening to two others, which I will talk about in my next week's reading review. So what's coming up, a holiday. Might be taking actually 2 trips. So that's going to be a lot of listening, but not a lot of reading with my eyes. And I'm kind of thinking ahead for that. So I will talk about more about that in my adding for the last week in November TBR video, which will probably come after what I hope to be, what I anticipate being a mini haul at my weekly Friends of the Library stop. And I don't foresee myself getting these and last week's books out into little free libraries until after the holiday, but we'll see. I think actually it won't even be until I start sort of my winter break that I'll take my big stack of books at that one point and distribute them around on a day. That's what I foresee happening. So we probably won't have a little free library haul. We might have a couple hauls from my travels, because I'm actually going in 2 different directions, I think, in the next 2 weeks. If that happens, I will see if I get to find some kind of a library book sale or a thrift shop or independent bookstore in both of those. We'll see. That's what you can look forward to in upcoming videos. And if not, then for sure, I'll see you in 1 week at the Week in Reading and Review.